But I have to wait till the magic clock.
Yeah, you got 30 seconds.
I'm gonna ask her to send me the.
Okay.
Actually, it's probably only 45 seconds late. Good morning, everyone. I'm David Barish, Chairman of the Pennsylvania Gaming Control Commission, Board, rather. For those of you who haven't heard this before, please turn off your electronic devices or put them on silent. With us today, I'm sure joining us will be Fred Strathmeyer, representing Russell Redding. He's not here at the moment. Jennifer Langen, representing Joe Torsella, State Treasurer, and Kristen Heidingsfelder, representing the Secretary of Revenue, Daniel Hassel. Thank you all for being here. Quorum of the, and Sean Logan is on the phone, I believe.
Yes, Chairman.
Great. Good morning, Sean.
Good morning.
Okay, a quorum of the board being present, I'll call today's proceedings to order. First order of business, the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
By way of announcements, the board held an executive session yesterday, Tuesday, April 16th, to discuss personnel matters and to conduct quasi-judicial deliberations relating to matters the board's going to be considering today. Next, we have consideration of a motion to approve the minutes and transcripts of the January 9th, 2019 and February 6th, 2019 meetings. May I have such a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approves the minutes and transcripts of January 9th and February 6th, 2019 meetings.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The motion is adopted. Kevin O'Toole. Good morning, Kevin.
Good morning, Chairman. Good morning, members of the board. Today, I have two items that I would like to present during my executive director's report. First, as reflected in our press release issued by our Office of Communications earlier this week, the month of March 2019 proved to be an incredible month for the casino industry in Pennsylvania. It is not very often that I can state at a public meeting that the industry accomplished the highest revenue month for table games, $82.5 million, in the almost 9-year history that table games have been operational. Also, I am pleased to report that the combined revenue of slot machines and table games for the month of March 2019 ranks as the highest revenue total for a single month for the casino industry in Pennsylvania, which began in November 2006. Over $309 million was the record total for gaming revenue in March, with slot machine revenue accounting for 73% of that total and table game revenue accounting for 27% of that total. Although the month of March is traditionally a good month for gaming revenue, the advent of retail sports wagering appears to have contributed to the increases in slot machine and table game revenue. The second topic that I would like to discuss this morning is interactive gaming. Interactive gaming featuring poker, slots, and table game play is a key component in the legislature's expansion of gambling in Pennsylvania. As part of our regulatory framework regarding interactive gaming, the board enacted the regulatory requirement to establish a commencement date for the rollout of iGaming. Staff has reviewed the estimated time that it would take for us and the industry to complete all necessary steps, and it is our view that 90 days would be adequate. Accordingly, I have advised the 10 iGaming certificate holders and 3 iGaming operators that a coordinated go-live period for interactive gaming will commence on July 15, 2019. Most importantly, board staff will assist all iGaming certificate holders and iGaming operator licensees who are not able to meet the initial launch period to commence their iGaming activity as those entities complete their preparations for a successful implementation. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Just like to recognize that Fred Strathmeyer has joined us. Good morning, Fred. Good morning. HR. Danette, good morning.
Good morning. Morning, Chairman, board members. The Office of Human Resources has one motion for your consideration today relative to the hiring of 5 individuals. Daniel Straczynski has been selected as an Assistant Chief Enforcement Counsel 2 under the Office of Chief Counsel. He has completed the interview process, background investigation, and drug screening, and is recommended for hire by Chief Counsel R. Douglas Sherman. Amy Iannello has been selected as a Casino Compliance Representative under the Bureau of Casino Compliance for Presque Isle Downs. She has completed the interview process, background investigation, and drug screening, and is recommended for hire by Acting Director of Casino Compliance, Trevor Hassenbein. Joe Coxon has been selected as an investigator under the Bureau of Investigations and Enforcement for the Western Region. He has completed the interview process, background investigation, and drug screening, and is recommended for hire by Director of Investigations, Paul Morrow. Elizabeth Bohm has been selected as Assistant Chief Enforcement Counsel 1 under the Office of Enforcement Counsel. She too has completed the interview process, background investigation, and drug screening, and is recommended for hire by Chief Enforcement Counsel Cyrus Petrie. And finally, Michael Kiefer has been selected as an auditor under the Bureau of Gaming Operations. He has completed also the interview process, background investigation, and drug screening, and is recommended for hire by Director of Gaming Operations, Paul Resch. Unless you have questions, I ask the board consider a motion to approve the hiring actions as indicated.
Thank you. Are there any questions from the board about these hires? Hearing none, may I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move the board approve the applicants for hire as proposed by the Human Resources Director.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted.
Thank you.
Thank you, Danette. Douglas Sherman, Office of Chief Counsel. Good morning, Doug.
Good morning, Chairman, members of the board. First, before the board are 2 petitions for your consideration. Both of the petitions will be decided based upon the documentary record by agreement of the parties. The board has, in advance of this meeting, been provided with all pleadings and other documents filed of record. The first petition before the board is that of Valley Forge Convention Center Partners, and it's their request seeking approval of a shared service agreement and corporate overhead support service agreement. On September 17th of last year, the board approved Boyd Gaming Corporation's acquisition of Valley Forge, making Valley Forge a wholly owned subsidiary of Boyd. In order for Boyd to provide Valley Forge with services and operations consistent with the Boyd operation model, Valley Forge is requesting to enter into a shared service agreement and corporate overhead support service agreement. That agreement will allow Valley Forge to have access to Boyd's human resource and corporate infrastructure resources. The services provided by Boyd will include, but are not limited to, finance, marketing, human resources, operations support, information technology, business services, legal, audit, communication, and governmental affairs. The Office of Enforcement Counsel does not oppose the granting of the petition, subject to several conditions outlined in their answer. Additionally, Valley Forge has filed a motion to protect confidential information contained in the exhibits attached to the petition. OEC has no objection to that request, and the Office of Chief Counsel would agree that confidentiality is appropriate. The matter relating to the shared service and the confidentiality request is now ripe for the board's consideration.
Thank you. Are there any questions, comments from the board? Hearing none, may I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve Valley Forge Convention Center Partners LLC petition for approval of shared services and corporate overhead support services agreement as described by the Office of Chief Counsel and with the conditions to be outlined in the board's order. I further move that Valley Forge's motion for confidentiality be granted.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The motion's adopted.
Stadium Casinos petition to readmit Principal Reed Cordish is the next matter before the board. The request is for board approval of a transaction in which Mr. Cordish will obtain a 29% ownership interest in Stadium Casino Baltimore Investors, which is the 100% owner of Stadium Casino LLC, the parent company to Category 2 licensee Stadium Casino and Category 4 licensee Stadium Casino Westmoreland RE. By way of background, the Stadium Casino Philadelphia project was approved by the board in November of 2014, and at that time Stadium Casino was 50% owned by Stadium Casino Baltimore Investors and 50% by Parks Casino. Mr. Cordish held a 29% interest in Stadium Casino Baltimore Investors and therefore derivatively a 14.5% interest in Stadium Casino LLC. As a result of that ownership, he was licensed as a principal by this board. In January 2017, Mr. Cordish joined the Trump administration as the Assistant to the President of the United States for Intergovernmental and Technology Initiatives. To avoid the appearance of a conflict of interest, he resigned from his position with Stadium Casino Baltimore Investors, transferred his interest in equal shares to his brothers, who also were licensed by the board, and he surrendered his principal license without prejudice. Mr. Cordish has completed his service with the Trump administration and seeks to resume his prior position with the Stadium Casino Baltimore Investors and the other Cordish companies. Since Mr. Cordish had left the Stadium Casino Baltimore Investors, Parks ownership in Stadium Casino was bought out by that entity, and the Cordish company and Stadium Casino Baltimore Investors is now the 100% ownership of Stadium Casino. Therefore, what was a 14.5% interest in our licensee has now gone to a 29% interest. Board regulations mandate that the board impose a fee upon a change of control of more than 20% of the ownership of a slot machine licensee. Stadium's petition argues that Mr. Cordish should be given credit for his initial 14.5% ownership interest that he relinquished to the brothers, and therefore his new interest is less than the 20% change in control. The Office of Enforcement Counsel has no objection to the petition, subject to conditions outlined in the answer, with the exception of Stadium's position that the change in control fee does not apply in this matter. OEC argues that Mr. Cordish should not get credit for the prior ownership that he had relinquished. Additionally, Stadium has requested that some of the information contained within the petition should remain as confidential, and OEC has no objection to that request. And this is the matter now before the board for decision.
Any questions or comments from the board? Hearing none, may I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move the board approve Stadium Casino LLC's petition to readmit Principal Reed Cordish as described by the Office of Chief Counsel and with the conditions to be outlined in the board's order. I further move that a $5,000 change in control fee be assessed against petitioner and that the petitioner's request for confidentiality be granted.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The motion is adopted.
Next, presenting withdrawals and reports and recommendations is Deputy Chief Counsel Steve Cook.
Morning. The board has received several unopposed petitions to withdraw the credentials or surrender the licenses of the following individuals and entities: Thomas P. Burke Sr., Gettysburg Travel Plaza LLC, Francis McCarthy, Jeremy Levine, Jordan Flagel, Jordan Michael Colson, Thomas William Kanenitz, Gary L. Gerasimic, doing business as Petroplus, Leomart LLC, Andrin Bachman, and Chris Sheffield. The Office of Enforcement Counsel has no objection to any of these petitions, and as a result, if the board grants the petitions, it would be doing so without prejudice to each of these parties.
Are there any questions or comments from the board? Hearing none, may I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board issue the orders to approve the withdrawals and surrenders as described by the Office of Chief Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed, the motion's adopted.
Next before the board for consideration are 9 reports and recommendations received from the Office of Hearings and Appeals. These reports and recommendations, along with the complete evidentiary record, have been provided to the board in advance of this meeting. And additionally, in each case, the person that is the subject of the report and recommendation has been notified that the board would be taking the matter up today. And if they wished, they could come forward and briefly address the board. If any of these persons are present and do wish to come forward, I'd ask them to do so when their matter is called. The first report and recommendation pertains to Saray Wyndham's petition for early reapplication for a gaming employee occupation permit. In June of 2015, Ms. Wyndham submitted an application for a permit seeking work as a table games dealer at Sands. On June 30th, 2015, the Office of Enforcement Counsel issued a notice of recommendation of denial based upon Ms. Wyndham's criminal record. Specifically, Ms. Wyndham was convicted twice in 2006 of shoplifting, and in 2013 she was convicted of theft-related offenses relative to her taking a patron's handbag while she was a patron, while Ms. Wyndham was a patron at Mohegan Sun Pocono Downs. On September 20th, ultimately the board granted OEC's request that that permit be denied. On September 20th, 2018, 3 years after the denial of her application, Ms. Wyndham filed a request to have her early reapplication seeking, again, her gaming employee occupation permit. A hearing in this matter was held on December 18th, 2018 before the board's Office of Hearings and Appeals. Ms. Wyndham failed to appear despite receiving notice of that hearing. Therefore, the only evidence put into the record was put in by the Office of Enforcement Counsel, who again objected to her being licensed as a gaming employee. And based upon that evidence, the hearing officer recommends that, in fact, her petition be denied. And that's the recommendation before them.
Thank you. Any questions or comments from the board? Hearing none, may I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board adopts the report and recommendation issued by the Office of Hearing and Appeals regarding Saray Wyndham's request for early reapplication for her gaming employee occupation permit described by the Office of Chief Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed, motion's adopted.
The next report and recommendation before the board today pertains to a request to recover winnings while on the self-exclusion list. Specifically, an individual with the initials CS filed a petition on September 6, 2018, requesting the board return monies confiscated from him while he gamed at a Pennsylvania casino while on the self-exclusion list. In April of 2016, CS placed himself on that list for a 5-year period. 2 years later, in September of 2018, he entered Downs Racing Casino and gamed for over 3 hours. Upon casino personnel determining that CS was in fact self-excluded, he was confronted, charged with criminal trespass, and security confiscated $655 in chips from him as allowed under the Gaming Act. CS filed this petition requesting a return of $400 of that $655, as that was the amount of his last buy-in at the table game he was playing. A hearing in this matter was held on November 14th, 2018. The Office of Enforcement Counsel attended, putting evidence into the record. OEC's evidence showed that CS made several buy-ins over a 3-hour period, that over that 3-hour period he had won and lost wagers, but his winnings ultimately were greater than his last $400 buy-in. Subsequently, the report and recommendation issued by the hearing officer recommended that his CS's petition in fact be denied because the entire $655 confiscated were indeed winnings. And that's the recommendation before the board.
Questions or comments from the board? Hearing none, may I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move the board adopt the report and recommendation issued by the Office of Hearing and Appeals regarding CS's petition to recover monies while on the PGCB voluntary self-exclusion list as described by the Office of Chief Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed, the motion's adopted.
Next before the board is a report and recommendation pertaining to an individual with the initials TN. In February of 2015, TN placed himself on the board's self-exclusion list, choosing a lifetime self-exclusion the lifetime self-exclusion option. TM subsequently requested removal from the list in May of 2018, but on November 28, 2018, this board denied that request. On May 2nd, 2018, TN and his wife, while he was on the exclusion list, entered the Valley Forge Casino and sat down at a baccarat table. TN's wife bought into the table for $10,000 and provided the dealer with her Players Club card. Upon receiving the chips in exchange for the $10,000, TN's wife relinquished control of those chips and gave them to TN, who began wagering and continued to do so for several hours. During the time period, TN lost and won numerous wagers. When he stopped gaming at approximately 1 a.m., several hours later, he was in possession of $14,000 in chips, which he asked the casino to take into their possession overnight. Thereafter, Valley Forge staff discovered TN was on the self-exclusion list and informed him that the entire $14,000 in chips would be confiscated. In July of 2018, TN filed a request that his $10,000 buy-in be returned to him, as it was not winnings but his own money. A hearing in this matter was held in January of 2019. Both the Office of Enforcement Counsel and TN participated at that hearing. OEC's evidence at the hearing used the Valley Forge Casino's data tracking system, in particular the wagering that was done by TN but was registered under his wife's Players Club card. And that data showed that over the period of time TN was playing, his $10,000 buy-in had been reduced to $1,100 before his luck changed and he turned around and ended up winning, or $4,000 overall, getting him up to $4,000. Based upon that evidence, the hearing officer determined that TN had wagered $8,900, basically everything but $1,100 of his $10,000 buy-in, and as a result, everything but that $1,100 was winnings and should be confiscated. As a result, the $1,100 should be returned to TN rather than the full $10,000. That's the recommendation to the board.
Questions or comments from the board? Hearing none, may I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board adopt the report and recommendation issued by the Office of Hearings and Appeals regarding TN's petition to recover monies while on the PGCB voluntary self-exclusion list as described by the Office of Chief Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted.
The next matter pertains to a third request for recovery of funds from a person while the person was on the board self-exclusion list. Specifically, in June 20th of 2011, an individual with the initials WM placed himself on the board's voluntary self-exclusion list for a period of 1 year. At that time, WM completed and signed all the necessary paperwork, which included a release and acknowledgement stating that a self-excluded person who had gambled while on the list could not collect winnings, and that in fact the winnings would be confiscated from that person. WM signed the paperwork, and which also stated that a person that chose a 1 or 5 year period of self-exclusion would remain on the list until they took steps to remove themselves on the list after the completion of the selected time chosen. As I indicated, WM chose a 1 year period. On July 31st, 2018, WM was found gaming at Sugar House after he'd won a jackpot at a video poker game of over $2,000. Once Sugar House staff became aware that TM was on the self-exclusion list as he'd never removed himself, his winnings were confiscated and turned over to the board. Since this event has occurred, WM has in fact removed himself from the list and filed this request that the jackpot be returned to him. A hearing in this matter was held on December 11th, 2018. Both the Office of Enforcement Counsel and WM participated in that hearing. During the hearing, WM did not dispute that he'd been informed both verbally and in writing of the removal process from the self-exclusion list when he placed himself on the list. However, WM did state that he'd forgotten what had transpired approximately 7 years earlier and took the position that the board should actually inform people at the end of their period, their selected period, and that was not done in this case, nor is it done in any case. After hearing all of the evidence presented, the hearing officer's report in recommendation, recommends that the board deny WM's petition. In fact, he did not remove himself from the list as he was directed to do so, and as a result, the jackpot should be retained by the board and used for compulsive and problem gaming programs.
Questions or comments from the board? Hearing none, may I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board adopt the report and recommendation issued by the Office of Hearings and Appeals regarding WM's petition to recover monies while on the PGCB voluntary self-exclusion list as described by the Office of Chief Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The motion's adopted.
Next before the board is a report and recommendation pertaining to a request for removal from the self-exclusion list. Pursuant to the findings of fact in the report and recommendation before the board, which was issued on January 31st, 2019, an individual with the initials LD entered the board's office in Conshohocken and requested to be placed on the self-exclusion list. The administrative assistant who placed LD on the list testified that she conducted the mandatory interview with LD, explained the process of placement and removal from the list, the consequences of the various exclusion options, including the fact that in a lifetime self-exclusion under the board's regulations right now, removal was not an option. And at that time, LD completed all of the required paperwork and followed all the required procedures. On August 23rd, 2018, LD filed a request for removal from the list. The Office of Enforcement Counsel filed an answer objecting to that request. A hearing was held. Both OEC and LD appeared. LD at that hearing basically took the position that she did in fact knowingly enter join the list or get onto the self-exclusion list and did so for a lifetime, but now with a period of reflection of about 1 month, she desires to come off so that she can continue to go to casinos with her friend group. The hearing officer, hearing all of the evidence, recommends that LD in fact remain on the list as the stated reason was not a justifiable reason for her removal from a lifetime self-exclusion.
Questions or comments from the board? Hearing none, may I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board adopt the report and recommendation issued by the Office of Hearings and Appeals regarding LD's petition for removal from the PGCB voluntary self-exclusion list as described by the Office of Chief Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The motion's adopted.
Michael Tran's report and recommendation is next before the board. Mr. Tran was issued a gaming employee occupation permit in August of 2017 to work as a table games dealer at Harrah's, Philadelphia. On August 2nd, 2018, approximately a year later, the Office of Enforcement Counsel filed a petition requesting Mr. Tran be placed on the board's involuntary exclusion list after receiving notice that he was charged with numerous criminal offenses based upon his participation in a cheating scheme at the Sugar House Casino. Specifically, Mr. Tran, who was a patron at the Sugar House Casino, conspired with Brittany Holmes, a table games dealer at Sugar House, to cheat while playing mini baccarat. Mr. Tran specifically would lose a wager, however, Ms. Holmes would not collect the losing wagers, and over the course of 3 days, that conduct cost the Sugar House Casino approximately $48,000. As a result of Mr. Tran's conduct, the board has already suspended his gaming employee occupation permit. That occurred back in February of 2018. Now, as indicated, OEC seeks to place him on the involuntary exclusion list. Upon receipt of that petition, Mr. Tran asked for a hearing. He attended the hearing as well as the Office of Enforcement Counsel, and both offered evidence. Mr. Tran did not dispute the conduct in question, but broadly stated or asserted that he was under duress to do that, and an unnamed individual was threatening his family if he did not participate in this scheme. The hearing officer ultimately found that there was not enough evidence to support that allegation, and as a result recommends that Mr. Tran in fact be placed on the involuntary exclusion list.
Quick question. What happened to the dealer that was in cahoots with him?
I believe an enforcement action for revocation or suspension occurred with her as well.
Okay. Any other questions or comments from the board? Hearing none, may I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board adopt the report and recommendation issued by the Office of Hearing and Appeals regarding the placement of Michael Tran on the PGCB involuntary exclusion list described by the Office of Chief Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted.
The next matter to be heard by the board today is the report and recommendation regarding Shanice Florney. Ms. Florney was issued a gaming employee occupation permit and worked as a table games dealer at Harrah's, Philadelphia, and the Parks Casinos. On December 28, 2018, the Office of Enforcement Counsel filed a request for an emergency suspension of Ms. Florney's gaming employee occupation permit after receiving notices that she had been charged with numerous criminal offenses, including multiple felonies. Specifically, it is alleged that Ms. Florney, along with 3 other women, attacked and assaulted a female victim and stole $900 from that victim. These criminal charges are presently pending. As a result of the charges brought, the executive director issued an emergency order suspending Ms. Florney's permit as requested by the Office of Enforcement Counsel. That ultimately led to a hearing before the Office of Hearings and Appeals, which was held on January 24th of 2019. Ms. Florney did not attend that hearing. The evidence put into the record by Enforcement Counsel was the criminal charges and the alleged conduct upon which they were based. And hearing that evidence, the hearing officer's recommendation is that the emergency suspension, or in this case, now that she's had a hearing, the suspension continue. And that's the recommendation to the board.
Questions or comments from the board? Hearing none, may I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move the board adopt the report and recommendation issued by the Office of Hearing and Appeals regarding the suspension of Shanice Florney's gaming employee occupation permit as described by the Office of Chief Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The motion's adopted.
Next before the board is the report and recommendation pertaining to Richard Pham. Mr. Pham was issued a gaming employee occupation permit in June of 2018 and worked as a table games dealer at the Sugar House Casino. On December 21st, 2018, the Office of Enforcement Counsel filed a request for an emergency suspension of Mr. Pham's gaming employee permit after receiving notice that he had been charged with numerous sex offenses relating to a 12-year-old minor. As a result of these charges, the board's executive director issued an emergency order of suspension, suspending Mr. Pham's gaming permit on December 21st. As required by the board's regulations, a hearing was subsequently held on January 17, 2019. Both Enforcement Counsel and Mr. Pham attended that hearing, although Mr. Pham did not actively participate in the hearing or object to any of the evidence put into the record by OEC, which included the criminal charges and the underlying bases. Based on that evidence, the hearing officer recommends that the suspension remain in place.
Questions or comments from the board? Hearing none, may I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board adopt the report and recommendation issued by the Office of Hearings and Appeals regarding the suspension of Richard Pham's gaming employee occupation permit as described by the Office of Chief Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted.
The final report and recommendation before the board today pertains to Tara Boehm. I've been informed Ms. Boehm is in the room. I don't know if she wishes to address the board, but if she does, I'd ask her to come forward. Briefly, by way of background.
Are you interested? Please come forward if you wish to.
Before you sit down, look over here, you'll need to raise your right hand and be sworn.
Yes.
Thank you. Please be seated.
I'll give a brief summary.
No, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman. Ms. Boehm holds a gaming employee occupation permit and works as a table games dealer at the Washington Trotting Association, Inc., or otherwise known as the Meadows Casino. In May of 2018, the Office of Enforcement Counsel filed a complaint to suspend her gaming employee occupation permit after receiving notice that she was charged with insurance fraud and theft. Specifically, Ms. Boehm's car insurance policy lapsed on September 6, 2017. She was thereafter involved in an accident on September 30th, 2017, had her policy reinstated on October 13th, 2017, and then attempted to file a claim regarding the accident I mentioned as if it had occurred on October 17th, 2017, after her insurance was reinstated. It was later discovered by her insurance carrier that she had attempted this, that the coverage was denied, and she was referred for criminal prosecution. A hearing in this matter was held on January 8, 2019. Both OEC and Ms. Boehm appeared at that hearing and put into evidence, or put evidence into the record. The testimony and evidence presented at the hearing showed that Ms. Bohm admitted to the conduct, expressed remorse for her actions, and also stated at the hearing that she was a single mother. At the time of the insurance lapse, she was unable to work at the casino due to the fact that she was on medical leave. Also testified that at that time, although she wasn't working at the Meadows, she was aware that the Meadows did want to hire her back, and as I understand it, I confirmed yesterday that in fact she is presently working at the Meadows, so they did hire her back. Ultimately, Ms. Bohm indicated that this was a mistake based upon financial stress she was under at the time, and as a result asks that the board not suspend her permit. Relative to the criminal charges associated with this incident, in December, Ms. Bohm was convicted of a misdemeanor and is presently serving a 12-month period of probation.
When does that period
It's
expire?
due, if she has to serve the full term, it will end in December of 2019.
I see. Before we hear from you, excuse me, are there other questions from council at this point?
I would recommend, or
Yeah.
just briefly mention that the hearing officer's recommendation
Thank
in
you.
this matter was that she, in fact, be suspended. In the report and recommendation, he did cite that he did feel some compassion for Ms. Bohm and indicated that to her that while he was recommending suspension, that he felt that when her probation period ended, she should immediately petition the board to have the
That's what I
suspension.
was wondering about. Thank you. Before we go further, if you have something you'd like to say to the board, please.
My name is Tara Bomey. As you all know, I work at the Meadows Casino and have for the last 4 years. I understand that I made a mistake with my insurance, and the only thing I was thinking was in the best interest of my daughter's safety at the time, not thinking of the horrible outcome. When I spoke to the investigators, I did not know that I was technically arrested on paper, and I was waiting to speak with my attorney about what I should do before I spoke to gaming. Then before I knew it, gaming knew, and I was not trying to be deceitful in any way. I have since paid my fine and finished my 50 hours of community service, and I was just unaware of the proper steps. I love my job. It is my livelihood and the only career that I have while being a single mom and raising my 2-year-old. Please reconsider taking away my gaming license. And 3 days ago, I was diagnosed with the flu, so I would not be here if I didn't care so much about my job. And I also have a letter of recommendation from one of my pit bosses. And that's all. Thank you for your time.
Excuse me, has that been provided to us?
I've not seen it.
There's a few copies in there.
It does appear to be what she stated. It's not on letterhead or anything, but it does.
Okay, is there any desire up here to see that letter?
I don't really want to see it since she might have the flu. But I would certainly, if they're comfortable with it, I'm comfortable with it.
Okay, I'm sorry, I cut you off. Please proceed.
Mr. Chairman,
Sean,
can somebody just summarize it?
yeah, go ahead. Doug will
Steve just summarize it?
Okay.
Yes, it's
from
a,
her.
it's a typed document from John Jacobs, the pit manager and supervisor of Ms. Bomey. States that he's been at Meadows for about 9 years. He was a blackjack instructor at the Meadows. That Ms. Bomey had enrolled in his class and completed the class, passed her audition, was hired by the Meadows, has been there about 4 years, and has been worked hard and been a good team member. The supervisor indicates that Tara has, to the best of his knowledge, been able to balance difficult aspects of the business with raising her child, and he hopes that the board finds compassion to allow her to keep her gaming license and continue her career at the Meadows.
I'm sorry, you were still sharing something with us, or had you completed your statement?
I'm completed.
Okay. Are there any questions or comments from the board at this time?
Thank you, and thank you, Ms. Bomey, for coming before us today. I know that that was some travel for you, and it does show us that you are remorseful and serious, understand the seriousness of your nature, of the nature of what happened. This is very important to the board that we keep with the standards of the kind of decisions that we have made. On the other hand, we also recognize the compassion of your employer if they were willing to give you a second chance. And I think that the motion and the decision that the board has made has really been trying to balance those needs.
Any other comments at this time?
Thank you.
Okay, is there a motion?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I move that the board adopts in part the report and recommendation issued by the Office of Hearing and Appeals regarding the suspension of Tara Bomey's gaming employee occupation permit, and that Ms. Bomey's permit be suspended for 2 days.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Good luck to you, and we never want to see you again, okay?
Thank you so much. I promise you won't ever have to.
The next two items before the board relate to a proposed regulation and a statement of policy, which Assistant Chief Counsel Chad Zimmerman will present.
Good morning, Chairman and members of the board. As Chief Counsel Sherman indicated, our next two agenda items are two regulatory material packets. The first is proposed rulemaking packet number 125-223 regarding 3 new table games and their rules of play. And the second is a statement of policy packet number 125-224 regarding side wagers and variations of existing table games. The proposed rulemaking packet provides the rules and procedures for 3 new table games that may be offered in Pennsylvania casinos if approved: Over Under, DJ Wild Stud Poker, and Face Up Pai Gow Poker. Over Under is a game with a simple premise. After placing an initial wager and being dealt 1 card, a player then makes a wager as to whether the point total of his or her hand will be under 18 or over 23 after being dealt 2 more cards. The player also has the option to forfeit the initial wager placed at that time. The game also provides for an additional bonus wager prior to the initial card being dealt that pays out on a pay table based upon a very high or low point total on your cards. DJ Wild Stud Poker is a game where the goal for the player is to make the best 5-card poker hand to compete against the dealer's best 5-card poker hand. A player wins if his best hand beats the dealer's best hand. This game of poker varies from others in that a joker is added to the traditional 52-card deck to act as a wild card, and all 2s in the deck are also considered wild. This game provides for additional side wagers, including a progressive wager. Face Up Pai Gow Poker is similar to that of traditional Pai Gow Poker, but as the name indicates, the dealer's Pai Gow hand is dealt face up instead of face down. A player is competing against the dealer to form a higher ranking high hand and low hand compared to that of the dealer. Other changes from traditional Pai Gow Poker include no player banking and different or additional bonus and side wagers that can be placed by a player. I'd be happy to answer any question you have on this regulatory packet material. If not, I'd request a motion to approve proposed rulemaking packet number 125-223.
Questions or comments from the board? Hearing none, may I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board adopt proposed regulation number 125-223 as described by the Office of Chief Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted.
And the second matter I'm presenting to you today is Statement of Policy Packet number 125-224. These statements of policy pertain to side wagers and variations to existing games that are currently offered in the Commonwealth. And those 4 games are roulette, craps, baccarat, and blackjack. The first is a side wager entitled the B2B roulette wager, where a player is placing a wager that the roulette ball will land in the same numbered space that it landed in on a prior spin. This wager pays out based upon a posted pay table that will be posted by the licensed facility. The second is a side wager entitled the Blazing Sevens Roulette Wager, where a player places a wager that the roulette ball will land in the number 7, 17, or 27 space. If that occurs, a bonus spin of the wheel is performed by the dealer, and the player's payout is based upon the result of that bonus spin. The third variation or side wager is a variation to the table game craps, but more specifically bonus craps as outlined in the current regulations adopted by the board. This new variation merely includes a new pay table and changes the verbiage of one of the wagers placed in bonus craps from the all or nothing at all wager to the make 'em all wager. The fourth matter in the packet is a side wager variation called 5 Treasures Baccarat, which offers 5 additional side wagers that a player can make during the game of Baccarat, where the player is wagering that a certain outcome will occur in either the player's hand, the dealer's hand, or both. The wager pays out based upon a specific pay table for each of the 5 different wagers included in 5 Treasures Baccarat. The fifth and final matter is the Buster Blackjack side wager, where a player is placing a wager on whether or not the dealer will bust during a hand of traditional blackjack. The payout is based on how many cards the dealer has in his hand when the bust occurs. I'd be happy to answer any questions on the statement of policy package. If not, I'd request a motion to approve statement of policy packet number 125-224.
Thank you. Questions or comments from the board? Hearing none, may I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move the board adopt the statement of policy number 125-224 as described by the Office of Chief Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The motion's adopted.
That concludes matters of the office.
Thank you, gentlemen. Bureau of Licensing, Sue Hensel. Good morning, Sue.
Chairman Barish and members of the board. Before the board today will be 3 fantasy contest operators, a conditional sports wagering operator, a conditional interactive gaming operator, a gaming junket enterprise, a VGT terminal operator, a VGT manufacturer, a conditional VGT supplier, a conditional VGT procurement agent, and 13 VGT establishments. In addition, there will be 1,569 principal key gaming and non-gaming employees and gaming-related gaming service provider qualifications. Finally, there will be the consideration of 10 gaming service provider applicants. The first matters for your consideration are fantasy contest operator licenses for Fantasy Draft LLC, Sports Hub PA LLC, and YFS Sub LLC. Fantasy Draft LLC does business as Fantasy Draft and is a Huntersville, North Carolina-based company. Sports Hub PA LLC is a Minneapolis, Minnesota-based company, and YFS Sub LLC is a Sunnyvale, California-based company. Each of the companies offers fantasy gaming in Pennsylvania. The Bureau of Investigations and Enforcement has completed its investigation of all 3 companies, and the Bureau of Licensing has provided you with background investigation and suitability reports. I have provided you with draft orders and ask that the board consider the orders to approve the fantasy contest licenses, beginning with Fantasy Draft LLC.
Office of Enforcement Counsel has no objection.
Questions or comments from the board? Hearing none, may I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board grant a fantasy contest operator license to Fantasy Draft LLC as described by the Bureau of Licensing.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted.
Next is Sports Hub PA LLC.
Enforcement Counsel has no objection.
Questions or comments from the board? Hearing none, may I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board grant a fantasy contest operator license to Sports Hub PA LLC as described by the Bureau of Licensing.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted.
And lastly, YFS Sub LLC.
Enforcement Counsel has no objection.
Questions or comments from the board? Hearing none, may I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board grants fantasy contest operation license YFS Sub LLC described by the Bureau of License.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The motion's adopted.
Next is a conditional sports wagering operator license for SB Tech Malta Limited. SB Tech Malta Limited is a Malta-based company that proposes to operate sports wagering on behalf of at least one sports wagering certificate holder. The board may issue a conditional sports wagering operator license provided the applicant has submitted a completed application, agrees to pay the $50,000 licensing fee prior to license issuance, and the Bureau of Investigations and Enforcement does not object to the license. The applicant satisfies these criteria. I ask that the board consider the order to conditionally license SB Tech Malta Limited.
Enforcement Council has no objection.
Questions or comments from the board? Hearing none, may I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move the board grant SB Tech Malta Ltd's conditional sports wagering operator license as described by the Bureau of Licensing.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion's adopted.
Also for your consideration is a conditional interactive gaming operator license for Betfair Interactive US LLC. Betfair Interactive US LLC is a Los Angeles, California-based company that seeks to provide an interactive gaming platform and other interactive services on behalf of at least one interactive certificate holder. Under the board's regulations, the board may issue a conditional interactive gaming operator license provided the applicant has submitted a completed application, agrees to pay the $1 million licensing fee prior to license issuance, and the Bureau of Investigations and Enforcement does not object to the license. The applicant satisfies these criteria. Prior to the meeting, I provided you with an order to conditionally license Betfair Interactive US LLC. I ask that you consider the order.
Enforcement Council has no objection.
Questions or comments from the board? Hearing none, may I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board grant Betfair Interactive US LLC's conditional interactive gaming operator license as described by the Bureau of Licensing.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted.
Next for your consideration is the approval of a gaming junket enterprise license for Casino Sales International, Inc. Casino Sales International, Inc. is a New Jersey-based business that offers junket services in the Commonwealth. The Bureau of Investigations and Enforcement has completed its investigation of the company, and the Bureau of Licensing has provided you with the background investigation and suitability report. I have provided you with a draft order and ask that the board consider the approval of a junket enterprise license for Casino Sales International, Inc.
Enforcement Council has no objection.
Questions or comments from the board? Hearing none, may I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move the board grant Casino Sales International's Inc.'s Gaming Junket Enterprise License as described by the Bureau of Licensing.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted.
Additionally, there is a VGT operator license for Marquee by Penn LLC, doing business as Marquee by Penn National Gaming, Inc. A VGT operator owns, services, and maintains VGTs for placement and operation at truck stop establishments. Marquee by Penn LLC was previously issued a conditional VGT terminal operator license. The Bureau of Investigations and Enforcement has now completed its investigation of the company, and the Bureau of Licensing has provided you with the background investigation and suitability report. I have provided the board with a draft order and ask that you consider the order to fully license Marquee by Penn LLC.
Enforcement Council has no objection.
Any questions or comments from the board? I have a question. In approving this, do we have information as to which truck stops or whatever Marquee may end up doing business with?
We do have visibility to some of those establishments. There could be additional, but yes, we do know that we do have visibility to the establishments that at this point Marquee has an agreement with.
They've contracted with Rudders.
Okay. Are we aware of the number? And if so, are you allowed to share that publicly?
It's at least 20.
Okay. Okay, thank you. If there are no other questions, may I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board grant Marquee by Penn LLC's video gaming terminal operator license as described by the Bureau of Licensing.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? The motion's adopted.
In addition is a VGT manufacturer license for NRT Technologies, Inc. NRT Technologies, Inc. is currently licensed in good standing with the board. Under the Gaming Act, the board may use an abbreviated process to consider the application of an already licensed manufacturer. The Bureau of Licensing, Office of Enforcement Counsel, and Bureau of Investigations and Enforcement have reviewed the application and the status of NRT Technologies, Inc. as a licensee, and I have provided you with the results of that review. I have also provided you with a draft order and ask that you consider NRT Technologies, Inc. for licensure.
Enforcement Council has no objection.
Questions or comments from the board? Hearing none, may I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board grants NRT Technology, Inc. video game terminal manufacturing license as described by the Bureau of Licensing.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted.
Next is a conditional VGT supplier license for H. Betty Industries, Inc. H. Betty Industries, Inc. is a New Jersey-based company that proposes to sell or service VGTs and associated equipment. Under the Gaming Act, the board may issue a conditional VGT supplier license provided the applicant meets certain criteria, including filing a completed application, having never had a similar license denied or revoked, having never been convicted of a felony or gaming law violation, and being current on state taxes. A preliminary review of the applicant indicates it satisfies these criteria. I have provided you with a draft order and ask that you consider the order to conditionally license H. Betty Industries, Inc.
Enforcement Council has no objection.
Questions or comments from the board? Hearing none, may I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move the board grant H. Betty Industry, Inc.'s conditional video gaming terminal supplier license as described by the Bureau of Licensing.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted.
Additionally, there is a conditional license for the VGT procurement agent applicant Philip Rolmza. Philip Rolmza is a Cranberry Township, Pennsylvania-based company. A procurement agent negotiates terminal placement agreements on behalf of a VGT terminal operator for placement of VGTs in truck stop establishments. In order to be eligible for a conditional license, the procurement agent applicant must meet the same criteria just detailed for the conditional supplier license. A preliminary review of the applicant indicates the applicant satisfies these criteria. I have provided you with a draft order and ask that you consider the order to approve a conditional procurement agent license for Philip Rolmza.
Enforcement Council has no objection.
Questions or comments from the board? Hearing none, may I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board grant Philip Rolms's conditional video gaming terminal procurement agent license as described by the Bureau of Licensing.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The motion's adopted.
Next, we have consideration of our first full establishment licenses for 5 VGT establishments. VGT establishments are truck stops seeking to place VGTs in their businesses. Each of the companies was previously conditionally licensed. The Bureau of Investigations and Enforcement has now completed its investigation, including an evaluation that the companies meet the VGT established eligibility criteria in the Act. And the Bureau of Licensing has provided you with a background investigation and suitability report for each applicant. Once fully licensed, the establishments can continue forward toward completing the necessary steps to commence VGT gaming. I have provided you with draft orders and ask that you consider the orders to license the following VGT establishments. 6406 Truck Plaza, LLC, doing business as Emlenton Truck Plaza. Bald Eagle Truck Stop, Inc., doing business as Bald Eagle Truck Stop. Keystone Restaurant and Truck Stop, Inc., Pit Stop Travel Plaza, Inc., and Snowshoe Travel Plaza, Inc.
Enforcement Council has no objection.
Questions or comments from the board? I have a couple. Just for public education, you mentioned these places. Do you have townships or towns in which these places are likely to be, not likely, or expected to be located?
Yes, I don't know if I have that information with me, but
that's okay. That's okay. Administratively, what happens next here is once we issue these licenses, is that the end of any further need for this board to vote on anything on these matters?
Yes.
It is the end of the need for the board to vote on matters. However, there is work remaining for the establishment. It has to submit its internal controls, it has to get its employees licensed, it has to have its machines tested. There are multiple steps that will have to take place before these establishments can actually begin operation, including a final inspection from the board.
Okay, but have we delegated some final administrative power to you or to Kevin or someone to actually bless this? Excuse me?
Yes, it's a normal course of business. It is delegated to me with notification to the board to allow implementation.
Okay. And what is the likely timeline from today, if we approve this, before one or more of these would actually be operating? Your best estimate, if there is someone who can give me that.
Well, since this is a brand-new activity, it's hard to estimate, but I would say possibly 3 months.
I see. Thank you. Any other questions or comments? If there are none, may I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board grant the video gaming terminal establishment licenses as described by the Bureau of Licensing.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The motion's adopted.
Also for your consideration are conditional VGT establishment licenses. The applicants are PFJ Southeast LLC, doing business as Pilot Travel Center number 708, and TA Operating LLC, sites number 003, 67, 68, 212, 213, 214, and 336, all doing business as Travel Centers of America. The board may conditionally license establishments provided the applicant has never been convicted of a felony, is current on state taxes, has submitted a completed application, and has not been convicted of a gambling law violation. A preliminary review of these applicants indicates that they meet these criteria. Note that unlike the establishments that were today fully licensed, these are strictly conditional approvals. Final approval will be based on the applicants meeting all of the eligibility criteria provided in the statute. A final eligibility determination will follow investigation and site inspections by the Bureau of Investigations and Enforcement. I ask that the board consider a motion to approve the conditional VGT establishment licenses.
Enforcement Council has no objection.
Questions or comments from the board? Hearing none, may I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board grant the conditional video gaming terminal establishment licenses as described by the Bureau of Licensing.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted.
Also for your consideration are principal and key employee licenses and gaming-related gaming service provider qualifications. Prior to this meeting, the Bureau of Licensing provided you with a proposed order for 5 principals, 5 key employees, and 2 gaming-related gaming service provider qualifiers. I ask that the board consider the order approving these licenses.
Enforcement Council has no objection.
Questions or comments from the board? Hearing none, may I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board grants the principal and key employee licensees and gaming-related gaming service providers qualifications as described by the Bureau of Licensing.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted.
There are also temporary licenses for your consideration. Prior to this meeting, the Bureau of Licensing provided you with an order regarding the issuance of temporary licenses for 2 principals and 15 key employees. I ask that the board consider the order approving these licenses.
Enforcement Council has no objection.
Questions or comments from the board? Hearing none, may I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move the board grant the temporary principal and key employee credentials as described by the Bureau of Licensing.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted.
Additionally, there are gaming permits and non-gaming registrations. Prior to this meeting, the Bureau of Licensing provided you with a list of 1,153 individuals to whom the Bureau has granted temporary or full occupation permits, and 312 individuals to whom the Bureau has granted registrations under the authority delegated to the Bureau of Licensing. I ask that the board consider a motion approving the order.
Enforcement Council has no objection.
Questions or comments from the board? Hearing none, may I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board grant the gaming employee occupation permits and non-gaming employee registrations as described by the Bureau of Licensing.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted.
There is also the recommendation of denial for 3 gaming and 1 non-gaming employee applicants. The applicants were notified that they were being recommended for denial and failed to request hearings within the specified time frame. The Bureau of Licensing has provided you with orders addressing each of the applicants who the Office of Enforcement Counsel has recommended for denial. I ask that the board consider the motions approving the denials.
Enforcement Council continues to request denial in each instance.
Questions or comments from the board? Hearing none, may I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board deny the applications for gaming employee occupation permits and non-gaming employee registrations as described by the Bureau of Licensing.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The motion's adopted.
Next for your consideration are withdrawal requests. In each case, the license, permit, or registration is no longer required. For today's meeting, I have provided the board with a list of 1 key employee, 58 gaming employees, and 13 non-gaming employees. I ask that the board consider the order approving the list of withdrawals.
Enforcement Council has no objection.
Questions or comments from the board? Hearing none, may I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board grant the withdrawal of key gaming and non-gaming employee applications described by the Bureau of Licensing.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted.
Finally, for your consideration, our gaming service provider registrations. The Bureau of Licensing provided you with an order and an attached list of 10 registered gaming service provider applicants. I ask that the board consider the order registering these gaming service providers.
Enforcement Council has no objection.
Questions or comments from the board? Hearing none, may I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approves the applicants for gaming service provider registration described by the Bureau of Licensing.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted.
That concludes the matters of the Bureau of Licensing.
Thank you very much, Susan. Cyrus, you're up.
All right. The Office of Enforcement Counsel will present 12 matters today for the board's consideration, in which we will request the board's approval of 3 consent agreements, 2 revocations, 3 suspensions, and 4 involuntary exclusions. The next 2 matters on the agenda for the board's consideration are consent agreements between the Office of Enforcement Counsel and Category 2 licensee Sands Bethworks Gaming LLC, doing business as Sands Bethlehem. The consent agreements will be presented by Senior Enforcement Counsel Michael Rowland. Representatives from Sands are present, and at this time I would request that those individuals please stand and introduce themselves for the record, and those not here as an attorney, please stand and be sworn.
I do.
If counsel would introduce themselves, please.
Michael, M-I-C-H-A-E-L, Magazoo, M-A-G-A-Z-Z-U, Vice President and General Counsel, Sands Bethworks Gaming, LLC.
Matthew Forbes, M-A-T-T-H-E-W, F-O-R-B-E-S, Director of Security, Sands Bethlehem.
Nicole Cox, Nicole-C-O-X, Director of Relationship Marketing.
Thank you. You may begin.
Morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. Michael Rowland, R-O-L-A-N-D, with the Office of Enforcement Counsel. Next is a proposed consent agreement between the Office of Enforcement Counsel and Sands Casino, which consists of 12 separate incidents of underage access to the Sands gaming floor by 11 different individuals. One individual actually gained access on 2 occasions. That's why there's separation between the 2. The underage patrons range from 18 to 20 years of age, and the 12 incidents occurred over a 10-month period, and underage gaming happened during all 12 incidents. In 8 of the 12 incidents, individuals played only slot machines. A total of 47 slot machines were utilized by 8 separate individuals. In 4 of the 12 incidents, the individuals played only table games. A total of 5 different table games were utilized by 3 separate individuals. 4 of the 12 incidents involved the service of alcohol to the underage patron, and a total of 17 alcoholic beverages were served during these 4 incidents. The total combined time for the 12 incidents in which an underage patron was unlawfully on the gaming floor is approximately 24 hours. In each case, the underage patron was permanently evicted by Sands, and the underage patron was criminally charged by either the Pennsylvania State Police or the Bethlehem City Police Department. Sands self-reported all 12 incidents. At this time, the Office of Enforcement Counsel requests that the board approve this consent agreement between the parties. The terms of the settlement include that within 5 days of the board's order approving this consent agreement, Sands shall pay a civil penalty of $120,000 for the alleged violations described. Also, within 5 days of the board's order approving this consent agreement, Sands shall pay the board $2,500 for the costs incurred by OEC, BIE, and other related staff in connection with this matter. Further, Sands shall immediately review its policies and controls and provide training and guidance to its employees, which will minimize the opportunity for the occurrence of similar incidents in the future. If you have any questions, we'd be happy to take them at this time.
Well, I'm going to ask counsel to make a comment or whatever, but I do have a question. You've given us a very detailed description of the course of conduct here. Was there any pattern or repetition in terms of individual employees of Sands being involved in multiples of these events, or is this just sporadic and spread all over the place?
For the most part, it's pretty sporadic.
So we don't have a couple of security guards who messed up 6, 7 times or something like that. It's spread around.
Unfortunately, it is spread around. 6 of the incidents of the 12 involved where the underage patron came in, they were completely unchallenged. Some of those situations, security officers were involved with other patrons. Some they weren't really paying attention. 5 of the incidents, I'm sorry, that are involved, the underage patron utilized a legitimate identification, but it was the identification of another person. So in most of those cases, the ID was actually scanned as required at the door, and they were permitted access. There was only one of the 12 incidents where a fake ID was used. It was a New Jersey driver's license, and it was caught the second time around. We have incidents where these underage patrons not only got through the door, but then spoke sometimes with security officers on the floor. So they had multiple face-to-face contacts. We have some incidents where they're actually sitting at a table game and they're carded at the table game and they're still permitted to play. So it's difficult to place blame on maybe 1 or 2 individuals because of.
I'm not sure which answer I was looking for. I was just trying to understand how
I tried
it
to
shapes
give
up.
the most thorough picture I could.
No, I appreciate that. If council would like to just make whatever comments you wish, and if you want to try to respond to my inquiry, that'd be fine.
Thank you, Chairman Barish and members of the board. First, to address your specific inquiry, I would agree with Mr. Rowland that there aren't any individual team members who have 6 or 7 incidents where they didn't follow procedure. And I'm confident in saying that because we have a strict 2-strike policy. And so within this consent agreement, there is at least one, I believe a few individual team members who experienced their second such infraction, and unfortunately for them, their employment was terminated as a result of some of these incidents that are the subject of this consent agreement. So I hope that answers your question, that we don't typically see team members who have a string of incidents like this, because if they experience 2 of those in a particular period of time, our policy
What is that period of time, by the way? Is it 2 strikes over 10 years or 2 strikes over
within
6
1 year.
wins? Excuse me?
Within 1 year.
I see. Okay. Do you have other comments, please?
Very generally, we have had ample time to review the terms of the consent agreement and discuss those terms with the Office of Enforcement Counsel. We're agreeable to those terms and prepared to pay the civil penalty and the administrative fees here today. And we ask the board that you approve the consent agreement in its current form.
Questions or comments from others? Okay.
First, for the Office of Enforcement Counsel. And I just am not sure exactly what I'm comparing this to, so I need some help from you. Often, it's not unusual for us to address these consent agreements or fines due to underage folks on the floor. And when we do that, we look at when was the last violation and how many of they had and what the fines were. And to me, this seemed like, and I just can't tell if it's because of how it was all put together, but still, more than 1 a month over the course of the year seemed like a lot compared to other establishments that we have seen before us. Is my conclusion correct? That it is more than what we normally see from other establishments, that many over a course of 1 year, or is it just the way it was presented?
No, Sands has had an ongoing problem with underage gaming. So they've had, because of the size of the facility and the mall and everything, they attract different patrons of different ages to those other sides of the complex. So at some point in time, some of them try to make their way into the casino floor. So Sands does experience that problem more than other casinos.
Okay. So then I guess my follow-up question to Sands is, because of, even if they are legitimate extra challenges because of how you're physically situated, and because of the seriousness of the board's concern with regard to underage folks getting access to the floor. I just wanted to point out that your track record is kind of worse than others, for lack of a better way to say it. And if there's anything that you want to say about that with regard to security measures or concerns, I would like to hear it on the record.
I can take that, Commissioner. Thank you. One bit of what I would consider mitigation in that regard is that, and I can't speak for 11 other casinos in the state and their practices in terms of combating underage individuals on the floor, but I can speak for Sands when I say that we are incredibly vigilant in that we don't rely only on security at the entrances to try to identify underage individuals. We rely heavily on our table games dealers, our what we call the public area department, which is internal cleaning maintenance, beverage servers, every employee, so especially those frontline employees on the casino floor, but every single employee is tasked by policy with asking for identification of any person who appears to be under 30, which I would argue is part of the reason that we're able to identify folks where other establishments might not be able to, because we are so vigilant.
So part of your answer is our vigilance is what might have us identifying more underage folks than others?
I would say it contributes to it. I wouldn't say that's the sole reason, but I would say that contributes to it. And we can go back over at least the last 3 years that I've been with the Sands, and as Mr. Rowland pointed out, we self-reported all 12 of these because we were able to recognize them while the folks were still on property.
Okay, and I asked the question also because we have, this isn't necessarily you, but you have a mall attached, and we now have several new facilities that will be attached to malls, and maybe it's more of a issue for our enforcement council that we kind of need to put folks on extra diligence in those regards, if that's one of the access points that makes it more tempting for young folks.
Yeah, and we recognize, as Mr. Petrie pointed out, that having a facility like a mall could contribute to having more minors on the general property, not necessarily the casino floor. And that's why we spend as much money and time and effort on the ID scanning system that we, enhanced over the past couple of years, and why we issue discipline as strictly as we do to our team members when we know that there's human error involved.
Okay. Thank you very much for your response.
Did you have a question?
Yes, I do. Just to follow up, Commissioner Mandarino asked a lot of those questions. But if I remember correctly in reading the consent agreements from prior years, you were under a consent agreement for, I think, $150,000 for some violations of a similar number. Were any of the individuals that were a problem this time part of that last consent agreement? In other words, outside of that 1 year period of time? Do we know?
You're asking about security or Sands personnel or the underage individuals?
The security personnel, yes.
I'm sorry, I don't have that answer off the top of my head to compare this consent agreement with past consent agreements. We would have followed our policy so that if it were 2 infractions within a 1 year period and there was some human error involved,
I was assuming it was outside of that year period, but that's
fine. It could have been, because after a year, that last infraction would, for all intents and purposes, be waived as far as that policy is concerned.
But there's continual training or diligence to follow up if
Absolutely.
There's more than one up, even if it's outside of that period of time.
Absolutely.
And just to follow up on what Commissioner Mandarino said, we do have other types of category licensees and truck stops coming online where this is certainly going to be an issue and concern for local residents. So I just wanted to ask those questions to be on the record. Thank you.
Any other questions or concerns?
You mentioned that there was one New Jersey ID that was used. Was that scanned through your ID system?
I believe in that incident it was scanned, and that was an instance where the security officer failed to recognize on the screen that it was a fake ID.
So the system identified it, but the employee did not. Okay.
If I recall that correctly, that's what happened.
Yeah, just real quick, I just to follow up on your policy for allowing, for carding is 30, and if someone looks 30 or younger, you card them. But I think 6 of the people just walked in without any kind of card. So that's the human error. Were they not there? They weren't paying attention?
It's not that they weren't there. We have our guest entrances staffed at all times. So, yeah, unfortunately, those were instances where those underage individuals were unchallenged for ID.
And then they were found when they were on the floor, either gaming or just walking around.
That's correct.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I have one question. Do you know how many in a year that you get for underage on the floor? Do you? How many you turn away? I mean, how many?
Yeah.
Or I say catch, trying to get on the floor.
So in 2018 alone, we had over 8.6 million guest entries. Doesn't necessarily mean 8.6 million individuals, because we have a lot of folks who will leave and then come back into the property. But over 8.6 million guest entries into the casino. Of those, there were 831,000 challenges for IDs. 4,510 turned away, 29 fake IDs that we caught, and a fake ID being an identification that is illegitimate, and 69 false IDs. And what we consider a false ID is a legitimate ID that belongs to somebody else.
Okay.
So 400, 500 people were turned away.
4,000.
4,000, rather.
4,510 people were turned away.
Okay. That's useful information.
Thank you.
There's no other questions. I have a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move the board approve the consent agreement between the Office of Enforcement Counsel and Sands Beth Works Gaming LLC as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The motion's adopted.
The next proposed consent agreement between the Office of Enforcement Counsel and Sands involves free slot play transactions awarded in violation of the Sands approved comp matrix. The Bureau of Investigation and Enforcement opened an investigation into the awarding of free slot play at Sands. The investigation focused on the authorization and issuance of discretionary free slot play as it pertains to the authorized limits and job titles set forth in the approved comp matrix, internal controls, and standard operating procedures at Sands during the years of 2015 and 2016. BIE's investigation revealed that discretionary free slot play was issued by employees who were not authorized to issue free slot play and/or issued amounts in excess of authorized amounts as set forth in the approved comp matrix. It was determined that a total of 6,428 free slot play transactions violated the approved comp matrix, with employees issuing an approximate total of $1,056,304 in excess of the amounts that were given that the given employee could authorize, or by an employee who could not authorize free slot play. There were 63 incidents where the employee issuing the complimentary play exceeded his or her authorized limit under the approved comp matrix, and 6,365 instances where the employee issuing the complimentary play was not authorized to issue free slot play. Additionally, BIE's investigation found that Sands did not develop, maintain, and apply adequate internal controls as required by Section 465A7A over the authorization and issuance of complimentary services or items, specifically free slot play, for the years of 2015 and 16. Sands has since updated their internal controls related to this area. At this time, the Office of Enforcement Counsel requests that the Board approve this consent agreement between the parties. The terms of the settlement include that within 5 days of the board's order approving this consent, SANS shall pay a civil penalty of $110,000 for the alleged violations described. Also, within 5 days of the board's order approving this consent agreement, SANS shall pay the board $2,500 for the costs incurred by OEC, BIE, and other related staff in connection with this matter. Further, SANS shall immediately review its policies and controls and provide training and guidance to its employees, which will minimize the opportunity for the occurrence of similar incidents in the future. And again, if you have any questions, we'd be happy to take.
Thank you. Are there any questions from the board? I have a couple, maybe just one. To me, this seems like a fairly unique issue that's come before the board, at least over the last 3 years. It's my understanding this inquiry that led to this is part of an ongoing process that we're looking at other casinos as well.
Yes, we've looked at all the casinos, and it was following the Mohegan Sun incident.
Right. And is this just the case that SANS is the first people in the hopper, if you will? Or
No, we've had some come before the board in the past.
Are we expecting more?
Yes, we are.
Okay, so just thought it's important to point out that you're not alone. Okay. All right. If there are no other questions, may I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the consent agreement between the Office of Enforcement Counsel and SANS Bethworks Gaming, LLC, as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The motion's adopted. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, Chairman and Commissioners.
Next matter on the agenda for the board's consideration is a consent agreement between the Office of Enforcement Counsel and Washington Trotting Association, LLC, doing business as the Meadows Casino. The consent agreement will be presented by Assistant Enforcement Counsel Thomas Monahan. Representatives from the Meadows are present, and at this time I would request that those individuals introduce themselves for the record, and anyone not here as an attorney, please stand and be sworn.
Michael Keelon, K-E-E-L-O-N, Director of Compliance.
Tony Frabile, F-R-A-B-B-I-E-L-E, Vice President and General Manager.
I do.
Good morning.
Good morning. Thomas Monahan, M-O-N-A-G-H-A-N, with the Office of Enforcement Counsel. Next matter for the board's consideration is a consent agreement between the Meadows Racetrack and Casino and the OEC regarding an incident involving an underage patron. On October 18th, 2018, an 18-year-old individual gained access to the Meadows gaming floor through the main entrance without being asked for identification by security. The individual was then able to wager at a roulette table, was served an alcoholic beverage by a server without being asked for identification either time. The individual then moved to a blackjack table where he was asked by the pit manager for identification. The 18-year-old presented a California ID that belonged to another individual that was 43 years of age. The underage individual did not game at that blackjack table. After leaving the gaming floor, the underage individual attempted to re-enter the gaming floor and was asked for identification by security. The individual again presented the California ID, and it was determined by Pennsylvania State Police that the ID did not belong to him, and he was cited. The underage individual was on the gaming floor for approximately 2 hours and 14 minutes. At this time, the OEC requests that the board approve this consent agreement between the parties. The terms of the settlement include that within 5 days of the board's order approving this consent agreement, the Meadows shall pay a civil penalty of $12,500 and an administrative fee in the amount of $2,500. If you have any questions, available at this time.
Questions or comments from the board? Oh, excuse me. Do either of you wish to make any comment at this time?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Please do.
First, good morning, members of the
morning.
board, Mr. Chairman. We feel it noteworthy to have it placed on the record that this particular instance, the two security officers who were involved and admitted this underage person onto the gaming floor had completed RU-21 training, so they were trained in identification and proper procedures. They chose not to follow those procedures, and as a result, they were both terminated. We take this seriously. We do not condone this behavior.
So is that a one strike you're out policy at your track?
It's a case by case. We view it case by case. In this particular instance, we reviewed surveillance footage. Their actions of disengagement were viewed as egregious. And we felt that was the proper stance to take.
I see. Other questions or comments from the board at this time? Thank you for that. If not, may I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the consent agreement between the Office of Enforcement Counsel and Washington Trotting Association, LLC, as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The motion's adopted. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
The next 5 matters on the agenda consist of enforcement actions in which the Office of Enforcement Counsel filed complaints seeking the revocation of 1 gaming employee occupation permit, 1 non-gaming registration, as well as the suspension of 2 gaming employee occupation permits and 1 non-gaming employee registration, which were issued by the board. Each complaint has been filed with the Board's Office of Hearings and Appeal and properly served upon the person named in each complaint. The person named in the complaint failed to respond within 30 days as required by board regulation. As a result, the Office of Enforcement Counsel filed a request for default judgment and properly served the same upon each named individual. Therefore, the facts in each complaint are deemed admitted. All filed documents have been provided to the board, and the matters are presently ripe for the board's consideration. In each instance, we will provide a brief summary of the facts and request the appropriate board action.
Good morning. Once again, Thomas Monahan with the Office of Enforcement Counsel. The next matter on the agenda for the board's consideration is the suspension of the non-gaming employee registration issued to Benjamin Gray. In April of 2018, Mr. Gray was charged with theft for stealing cash and jewelry from the residents of the assisted living facility in which he was employed. The charge is currently pending in Erie County. At this time, OEC requests that the board suspend the non-gaming employee registration issued to Benjamin Gray.
Questions or comments from the board? Hearing none, may I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the suspension of Benjamin Gray's non-gaming employee registration as requested by the Office of Enforcement Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The motion's adopted.
Next matter on the agenda for the board's consideration is the revocation of the non-gaming employee registration issued to Christian Harley. In January of 2018, Mr. Harley pled guilty to felony forgery for stealing personal checks, forging the victim's signatures, and cashing them in for a total amount of $2,380. At this time, OEC requests that the board revoke the non-gaming employee registration issued to Christian Harley.
Questions or comments from the board? Hearing none, may I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approves the revocation of Christian Harlan's non-gaming employee registration as requested by the Office of Enforcement Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted.
Next matter on the agenda for the board's consideration is the suspension of the gaming employee occupation permit issued to Eddie Padilla. In September of 2018, Mr. Padilla was arrested and charged in the city of Philadelphia after he was found to be in possession of a deliverable amount of a controlled substance and a concealed loaded weapon without a license. These charges are currently pending. At this time, OEC requests that the board suspend the gaming employee occupation permit issued to Eddie Padilla.
Questions or comments from the board? Hearing none, may I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move the board approve the suspension of Eddie Padilla's gaming employee occupation permit as requested by the Office of Enforcement Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted.
The next matter on the agenda for the board's consideration is the suspension of the gaming employee occupation permit issued to Colleen Kasdaglis. In November of 2018, Ms. Kasdaglis was charged for calling in and assisting her fiance call in bomb threats to the Monroe County Courthouse on seven different occasions between July and November of 2018. Her charges are currently pending in Monroe County. At this time, OEC requests that the board suspend the gaming employee occupation permit issued to Colleen Kasdaglis.
Questions or comments from the board? Hearing none, may I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the suspension of Colleen Kasdaglis gaming employee occupation permit as requested by the Office of Enforcement Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The motion's adopted.
Good morning, Chairman, members of the board. John Crowe, C-R-O-H-E, for the Office of Enforcement Counsel. The next matter for the board's consideration is the revocation of the gaming employee permit held by Colin Boker. Mr. Boker was terminated from Mohegan Sun Pocono for his involvement in rigging a promotional event at Mohegan Sun and ultimately pleading guilty to theft by deception. The Office of Enforcement Counsel now requests that the board revoke the gaming employee permit held by Colin Boker.
Questions or comments from the board? Hearing none, may I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the revocation of Colin Boker's gaming employee occupation permit as requested by the Office of Enforcement Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The motion's adopted.
The remaining matters on the agenda consist of enforcement actions in which the Office of Enforcement Counsel filed petitions seeking the involuntary exclusion of individuals whose presence in a licensed facility are inimical to the interests of the Commonwealth and are licensed gaming therein. In each instance, the petition for exclusion has been filed with the Board's Office of Hearings and Appeal and properly served upon the individual named in the petition. The individual named in the petition failed to respond within 30 days as required by board regulation. As a result, the Office of Enforcement Counsel filed a request for default judgment, and in each instance properly served the same upon each individual. Therefore, all facts in each petition are deemed admitted. All filed documents have been provided to the board, and the matters are presently ripe for the board's consideration. In each instance, if the board orders a proposed exclusion, each individual's photo, personal identifiers, and a summary of the inimical conduct will be placed on the board's public website.
Good morning, Chairman Barish, members of the board. Dustin Miller on behalf of the Office of Enforcement Counsel. Next on the agenda for the board's consideration is the request to place Eugene Joyner on the exclusion list because of his involvement in cheating at an ultimate Texas Hold'em game at Sugar House Casino. Mr. Joyner was charged with 2 violations of the Gaming Act, sleight of hand or scheme, and unlawful to take, claim, or collect with intent to defraud or cheat, and 2 theft offenses, theft by unlawful taking and theft by deception, all misdemeanor offenses. Accordingly, the Office of Enforcement Counsel requests the board enter judgment upon default and place Mr. Joyner on the board's involuntary exclusion list.
Questions or comments from the board? Hearing none, may I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the addition of Eugene Joyner to the PGCB involuntary exclusion list as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The motion's adopted.
Good morning, Chairman Barish, members of the board. David Tepper, TEPPER with the Office of Enforcement Counsel. Next on the agenda is a request to place Alvin Seiler Jr. on the involuntary exclusion list. While a patron at Parks, Mr. Seiler cheated while playing various table games. As a result of his conduct, Mr. Seiler was criminally charged by the Pennsylvania State Police. And at this time, the Office of Enforcement Counsel requests that the board add Alvin Seiler Jr. to the board's involuntary exclusion list.
Questions or comments from the board? Hearing none, may I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approves the addition of Alvin Seiler Jr. to the PGCB involuntary exclusion list described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The motion's adopted.
Good morning, Chairman and Commissioners of the Board. Benjamin Farrell, F-E-R-R-E-L-L, Assistant Enforcement Counsel for the Office of Enforcement Counsel. The next matter for your consideration is a petition to place Kenyatta Easley on the exclusion list. Ms. Easley cheated while playing Baccarat at Harrah's Philadelphia Casino and Racetrack. Specifically, Ms. Easley placed a $25 bonus wager after the close of the betting period, which resulted in an unlawful win of $625. The Pennsylvania State Police was notified and charged Ms. Easley with 1 count of unlawfully win or produce a loss and 1 count of theft by deception. At this time, OEC requests the board issue an order placing Kenyatta Easley on the involuntary exclusion list.
Questions or comments from the board? Hearing none, may I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move the board approve the addition of Kenyatta Easley to the PGCB involuntary exclusion list as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The motion's adopted.
The next matter for consideration is a petition to place Terrell Troy on the exclusion list. Mr. Troy altered the outcome of roulette spins while performing his job duties as a dealer at Harrah's Philadelphia, which resulted in a loss by Harrah's Philadelphia of $6,803. Mr. Troy was criminally charged, subsequently pled guilty, and was sentenced to 2 years probation, have no contact with Harrah's Philadelphia, and pay $3,543 in restitution to Harrah's Philadelphia. At this time, OEC requests the board issue an order placing Terrell Troy on the involuntary exclusion list.
Questions or comments from the board? Hearing none, may I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the addition of Terrell Troy to the PGCB involuntary exclusion list as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted.
Thank you. That concludes our business.
Thank you. That is the end of what we have before us today. Our next public meeting will be held on Wednesday, May 15th at 10 a.m. in this room. May I have a motion to adjourn the meeting?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The motion is adjourned. Thank you very much.